"Sit down and shut up," echoed through Riverside County Courthouse when no one expected it would end Court Officer Daniels's career. His disrespect to the elderly veteran wasn't just rude behavior. It was an insult to one of America's most respected military commanders. Welcome to Hidden Legends. Before we begin this story about respect, authority, and consequences, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe authority must be earned, not just worn, hit that subscribe button. But first, you need to understand how one moment of disrespect would change a courthouse forever. Riverside County Courthouse handled dozens of cases daily: traffic violations, small claims disputes, family court matters, the routine business of local justice. Officer Rick Daniels had worked courthouse security for 8 years, checking IDs, operating metal detectors, and maintaining order in the galleries. Daniels was 34 years old, stocky build with the swagger of someone who enjoyed his small sphere of authority. He'd never served in the military himself, had no particular respect for those who had, and saw his courthouse position as more important than it actually was. James Mitchell entered the courthouse that Tuesday morning looking like any other elderly witness, 71 years old, gray hair neatly combed, wearing a slightly worn but clean navy suit. He walked with a slight limp, carried a thin briefcase, and had the quiet dignity of someone who'd learned not to demand attention. At the security checkpoint, Daniels barely looked up from his phone as Mitchell placed his keys and wallet in the plastic bin. "ID," Daniels said without making eye contact. Mitchell handed over his driver's license. Daniels glanced at it briefly, noted the veteran designation, and handed it back with indifference. "Arms up," Daniels commanded, waving the metal detecting wand with practiced boredom. The wand beeped softly over Mitchell's left knee. "What's that?" Daniels asked. "Prosthetic knee," Mitchell said quietly. "I have documentation if needed." Daniels rolled his eyes. "Great. Another war injury story. Just go through." Mitchell said nothing, collected his belongings, and headed toward courtroom B, where he was scheduled to testify in a personal injury case. He'd been called as a character witness for his neighbor, a young veteran struggling with PTSD who'd been in a car accident. An hour later, Mitchell was called to the witness stand. As he made his way forward, his slight limp was more noticeable in the formal courtroom setting. The judge, attorneys, and jury watched respectfully as he was sworn in. "State your name for the record," the clerk requested. "James Robert Mitchell." "And your relationship to the defendant?" "He's my neighbor. I've known him for 3 years since he moved in next door after returning from deployment." The defense attorney began his questioning, asking Mitchell about the defendant's character, his struggles with readjustment, and his efforts to rebuild his life after military service. "Mr. Mitchell," the attorney said, "based on your observations, would you say the defendant has been working to overcome the challenges he faces?" "Yes," Mitchell replied. "He reminds me of many young soldiers I've known who struggle with transition back to civilian life. With proper support and understanding, they can overcome these challenges." The prosecutor objected. "Your Honor, the witness is not qualified to make psychological assessments about military personnel." This is where things began to go wrong. Mitchell had been attempting to explain his perspective when Officer Daniels, who had been standing near the gallery, suddenly spoke up. "Your Honor," Daniels called out, "this witness has been disruptive earlier. Maybe we should move this along." Judge Patterson looked confused. "Disruptive how?" "He was going on about war stories at security," Daniels said dismissively. "These old guys always do that. Think their service makes them special." The courtroom went quiet. Mitchell's attorney looked stunned at the breach of protocol. The judge frowned at Daniels. "Officer Daniels," Judge Patterson said, "witnesses are not disruptive for providing testimony." But Daniels, emboldened by what he perceived as support from the bench, continued. "Judge, maybe we could ask Mr. Mitchell to keep his answers brief and not turn this into a military story session." Mitchell sat quietly through this exchange, his hands folded, his expression neutral. He had encountered disrespect before and had learned that dignity was maintained through composure, not confrontation. The defense attorney, however, was furious. "Your Honor, I object to the court officer's characterization of my witness." Sustained, Judge Patterson said, giving Daniels a warning look. Officer Daniels, please remain silent unless there's an actual security issue. But the damage had been done. Mitchell could see the discomfort in the room, the way the jury was now looking at him as if he were some old man prone to rambling war stories rather than a legitimate witness. That's when Mitchell's attorney made a decision that would change everything. Your Honor, the attorney said, perhaps the court would benefit from understanding Mr. Mitchell's qualifications to assess military personnel and their challenges. He walked to his table and picked up a file folder. Mr. Mitchell, would you please tell the court about your military background? Mitchell hesitated. He'd hoped to avoid this. I served in the Army for 30 years. What was your final rank? Colonel. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Officer Daniels shifted uncomfortably. And what was your specialty? I commanded the 75th Ranger Regiment for 6 years. The prosecutor, who had been preparing another objection, stopped mid-motion. The 75th Ranger Regiment was legendary even among civilians. Mitchell's attorney continued. Could you briefly describe your combat experience? 3 tours in Vietnam, 2 in Panama, 3 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. The courtroom was now completely silent. Even Officer Daniels had stopped shifting and was staring at Mitchell with growing alarm. And have you received any military decorations? Mitchell looked uncomfortable. Several. Could you name a few for the court? Silver Star, Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters, Distinguished Service Cross. Judge Patterson leaned forward. Mr. Mitchell, did you say Distinguished Service Cross? Yes, Your Honor. The judge's entire demeanor changed. The Distinguished Service Cross was the second highest military decoration awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat. Mitchell's attorney pulled out a document. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence Mr. Mitchell's DD-214 military discharge papers, which detail his full service record. As the document was passed to the judge, Mitchell's attorney addressed the courtroom. Colonel Mitchell commanded over 2,000 Rangers during his tenure. He's one of the most decorated soldiers of his generation. His assessment of military personnel isn't opinion. It's expert testimony based on 3 decades of leadership experience. Officer Daniels had gone pale. The man he'd dismissed as just another rambling old veteran was actually one of the most respected military commanders in modern American history. Judge Patterson studied the discharge papers, his expression growing more serious with each line he read. Mr. Mitchell, he said finally, I want to personally apologize for any disrespect shown to you in my courtroom. No apology necessary, Your Honor, Mitchell replied quietly. I'm here to serve the court's needs. But Judge Patterson wasn't finished. He turned toward Officer Daniels with an expression that made the entire courtroom tense. Officer Daniels, he said coldly, you will report to my chambers immediately after this session. Daniels swallowed hard. Yes, Your Honor. The testimony continued, but the atmosphere had completely changed. The jury now listened to Mitchell's every word with deep respect. His insights into the defendant's character and potential for recovery carried the weight of decades of military leadership experience. When Mitchell stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom remained silent out of respect. As he passed Officer Daniels on his way out, he paused briefly. Son, he said quietly, authority is earned, not demanded. Remember that. Daniels couldn't meet his eyes. Within hours, word of the incident had spread throughout the courthouse staff. By evening, local veteran organizations had heard about a decorated colonel being disrespected by courthouse security. By the next morning, the story had reached social media. A week later, Officer Rick Daniels was reassigned to a different position. He never worked courthouse security again. Colonel James Mitchell never spoke publicly about the incident. When contacted by reporters, he simply said, young people sometimes make mistakes. What matters is learning from them. But the impact rippled through the courthouse culture. New protocols were established for treating veterans with respect. Sensitivity training became mandatory for all court personnel. And Mitchell's neighbor, the young veteran he'd testified for, received the understanding and support he needed from the court, partly because everyone now understood that his character witness was one of America's most respected military leaders. Sometimes respect must be demanded, sometimes it must be taught, and sometimes a single moment of disrespect teaches more about character than years of formal education ever could. Have you ever witnessed someone in authority learn a hard lesson about respect? Share their story in the comments and tell us which city you're watching from. At Hidden Legends, we share stories about respect, service, and the consequences of our choices every week. Subscribe to hear more stories that remind us why authority must always be tempered with humility. Remember, the person you're dismissing today might be the hero you should be honoring.